Well, I think we are going to start because we are a little bit pressed of time. So, well, when we were preparing the seminar, we thought that would be, perhaps it would be useful for the students to offer them a few reflections on the importance of the TFM in the context not just of the master, but also of academic and or professional life. So I'd like to start these reflections by bringing to your attention the importance of mastering the analytical and research skills required to produce a good TFM. As you all know, and I'm sure many of you are at this moment considering either the subject or the theoretical frame or the supervisor you'd like to approach to guide you along the process, the TFM crowns the whole degree. Its success guarantees not only that you have fully assimilated the contents of the master's syllabus, but what is more important, you have acquired the skills that will enable you to apply your ability to analyze and interpret complex cultural and literary texts to the analysis and interpretation of complex social issues, which is the main aim of this master. The formative activities proposed to achieve this goal, all of which revolve around the practice of text commentaries of various kinds, are directed to this aim. The main objective of this master, I'd like to repeat, is the realization of the import of literature and culture in understanding the discourses and practices that give shape to social and political relationships. I'd like to underline at this point that the training it provides, this master provides, is of course a must for an academic career in the field of English studies. But it is also highly valued in both the public and the private sectors and opens up a wide range of professional activities. Literary and cultural studies is a relatively new interdisciplinary field of teaching and research that draws on methods and theories from literary studies, but also, and perhaps primarily, from history and historiography, feminist and gender studies, sociology, discourse, and film and video studies. By working across the boundaries among these fields, cultural studies addresses new questions and problems of today's world, examining the social, economic, and political conditions that not only shape the organization of life and of the life of populations, but influence on aspects as intimate as the construction of the self. Cultural studies explores the habitual privileging of race, class, and gender, and also subverts the traditional distinctions between high art and low, questioning traditional value hierarchies, instead of more attention to the canon, which has traditionally been the corpus of literary studies. Cultural studies rather examines work by minority groups and post-colonial writers, as well as the products of folk, urban, popular, and mass culture. We could go as far as saying that cultural studies is not so much concerned about the author or the structure, nor about the value or even the aesthetics of a text, but about, and this is very important, but about how texts engage with real life, how power operates within culture, and how power dynamics are reflected in texts. If we now turn to literary studies, the first thing to point out is that they have become enormously inclusive. I'm sure you have realized that many of the features I have mentioned as belonging in the field of cultural studies fit just as well in the field of literature. Questions of identity and representation, issues of race and ethnicity, of gender and power, how a text engages with real life, are vital in analyzing a literary work. Both literary and cultural analysis of texts draw from common critical theories and practices such as postmodernism, new historicism, cultural materialism, feminist and gender studies, discourse analysis, semiotics, reception theory, intertextuality, and so on and so forth. As I said before, my point in this talk is to convince you that a solid background in literary and cultural studies is a formidable tool for interpreting texts and their representations of reality. If you are able to decipher a complex literary text and the way it engages with real life, which is the final aim of your TFM, you will be able to interpret any representation of reality in the working field of humanities you choose, whether in the university or any other profession beyond it. That will be your principal core value. What are core values, you may ask? Well, core values are those values which form the foundation on which we perform work. They are the basic elements of how we go about our work. They are the practices we use or should be using every day in everything we do. And I assure you that text analysis is an absolute must for the correct reading and interpretation of a literary text. It requires mastering the analytical and research skills this degree demands, which significantly, and this is very important, match with a set of the most important soft skills in demand in the job market. The term soft skills refers to those general skills that in an increasingly global world will help you in a wide range of jobs, not just the particular one of literature teaching. And the reason is that the analytical and research skills required for the literary and or cultural analysis of complex texts deal with the ability to assess a situation, seek multiple perspectives, gather more in-depth information if necessary, and identify key issues that should be addressed or that need be addressed. As such, a good training in highly analytical thinking provides the ability for identifying, scrutinizing, improving, and streamlining complex word processes, and is highly valued in the job market, particularly in the field of administration, publishing, and communication, all of them within the field of humanities. In hard competitive times such as ours, what advice would I give you? Well, my advice to succeed is that you become very good at the subject you choose to specialize in, whatever that may be. The secret is to strive for excellence from scratch. If you have never had that ambition, take the decision right now. Excellence must be your motto from now on. So make sure you examine your weak points and gaps and work to fill them out without further waiting and without taking shortcuts. This doesn't mean that you need to be competitive. If you look neither right nor left, but ahead of you, you will live free from the nasty world of rivalry and anxiety. Simply fall in love with what you do. Do it with passion, and the results will follow. If I'm saying this, it's because I'm sure that you have already discovered how little you know. Afterward, I'm also sure you have lived as long years of study. In fact, the more you learn and know, the more you will realize that all that is there to yet learn and know, to the point that the task ahead may sometimes look quite disheartening. But don't worry. The awareness of the urgent need to know more is indispensable, whether in the academy or in any other professional activity. I can assure you that what is really dangerous is what you don't know that you don't know. We live in a fast-changing world, And you will have to continue to evolve in all your skills, your thinking, your working methods, and instruments. Just think how fast new technologies change, just as in your views about life. So be certain that the best gift university provides us with is not so much the amount of as the thirst for knowledge. Work ethic is another important soft skill. I'm not going to deal at this point with plagiarism. That's illegal, it's a crime, it's duly punished, so I'm not going to deal with it. But in the field of interpretive text analysis, work ethic means that we cannot do with a text what we want. We cannot make it mean what we like. As Hillis Miller puts in The Ethics of Reading, the political and ethical are, of course, always intimately intertwined. But an act that is fully determined by political or subjective considerations is no longer ethical. Miller alerts us to a misreading of the text imposed by our subjectivity, by our private ideology, or by the ideology of the community of readers to which we belong. So we've got to be very careful about this. English graduates in humanities and or English studies are likely to be very well suited to public sector roles, thanks precisely to a highly developed spoken and written communication skill, to the ability to research and analyze complex written information, and the ability to contextualize issues based on historical, political, cultural, and social realms. Of course, analysis can't be bent to suit one's preconceptions, as we see in everyday life, as I mentioned before at the introduction of this seminar, in politicians, journalists, and sadly enough, in some so-called intellectuals. I have strongly emphasized a few terms and concepts: the relevance of text analysis. The relevance of text analysis, core values, soft skills, excellence, thirst for knowledge, and work ethic, all equally important for an academic and or professional career elsewhere. Let me now focus on literature proper, also within the perspective of an academic career or any other profession in the field of humanities. On purely utilitarian grounds, literature has traditionally occupied a secondary position, particularly as compared with language and linguistic studies. We're all well aware of this. Yet, I'm happy to be in the position to stand up for its importance in today's world. Literature is the great archive of human history in its full depth and wideness. There's no passion, concern, feeling, yearning, affect, or convulsion that doesn't find expression in it, among its pages. There's no heroic deed that literature does not sing, no tragedy it does not mourn, no philosophical or moral speculation it does not dwell in. Literature is set to mirror life and what we call reality, and it's true. But it does it in many ways, not just mimetically, as classic realism held, but in the most experimental, sometimes absurd ways, as modernism and postmodernism have counter-argued, demonstrating how literature distorts reality in order to create a reality more real than reality itself. And that is because literature is a paradoxical art. It uses fiction to explore truth. It uses language to express the unutterable, to describe the undescribable. Its aesthetic power involves our emotions, leading us to suspend our disbelief, as Romantic poet and critic Samuel Coleridge held. The cry in the poem, goodness, so perhaps I pressed too hard. Well, it goes to take me some time. well, it seems it helps you recall what we've been saying. The cry in the poem may come to sound louder, more urgent, more real than the cry in the street outside. The death in the novel may move us more potently than the death in the next room, says American critic George Steiner in his influential book, Language and Silence. Let me give you an example. You may remember the case of women members of the American Army in Iraq in the Gulf War in 2003, when Bush was in government, who denounced the harassment suffered at the hands of their fellow men soldiers. American journalist and novelist Helen Benedict carried an illuminating experiment. In 2010, she published The Lonely Soldier, The Private War of Women Serving in Iraq, an account of the double war waged by female soldiers against the enemy and against their own men colleagues, based on interviews to 40 women who had served in Iraq. Women denounced the harassment, the assault, and rape perpetrated by their comrades, not by the enemy. The book, you can imagine, raised an uproar, and indeed is informative and enlightening, but can't compare in emotional impact with The Sand Queen, a novel she published a year later in 2011, based on the same interviews. The term Sand Queen is a derogatory term that's specific to the Iraq War. It's a term used mainly in the army. It means an unattractive woman who is the object of a lot of attention from men because women are so scarce. And she also allows herself to be used by these men who wouldn't look twice at her back at home. It summarizes the denigrating attitude that so many military men have towards military women. In an interview on November 15, 2012, which is available at internet, Helen Benedict was asked about the differences between fiction and reportage on the same subject, and here is her answer. The role of fiction is to go into the human soul, to go into the places real people are reluctant to talk about or even look into. For The Lonely Soldier, I interviewed women who'd served in Iraq with many different branches of the military. But as open as they were with me, there were still those moments when they fell silent, or their eyes would fill with tears, or they'd deflect questions with jokes, or start to shake. In those silences, I knew there was another story going on, one they couldn't or wouldn't talk about, which was the interior experience of living through a war, what it really felt like and what you thought privately. That's why I needed to turn to the territory of fiction. So that connects with what Sylvia said this morning, that literature deals with the story of the soul, or with our experience with the real world, but lived from the inside, from things that we cannot even communicate. And so there's the need of literature to give the real, the authentic, the in-depth experience of life. The novel teaches us to live like nothing else can, said literary author D.H. Lawrence in his essay, Morality and the Novel. Never trust the teller, trust the tale, he said yet again in studies in classic American literature. And here's the paradox again, because literature teaches us to question the author, or rather the concept and function of the author, as Michel Foucault explored very perceptively in his essay, What is an Author? As well as teaches us to mistrust the transparency of the text, its apparent morality. Deconstruction theory encourages us to be resistant readers by learning to read so to say, against the grain, exploring into the gaps, the seams, and junctions of the texts, into their palimpsests, in order to reach their authentic meaning. Reading is no easy task. In fact, as American critic Hillis Miller claimed in the book I mentioned before, The Ethics of Reading, reading is extraordinarily hard work. It does not occur all that often. Clear-headed reflection on what really happens in an act of reading is even more difficult and rare. We risk getting the meaning wrong, perhaps through fatigue or boredom or anxiety, or as a result of some other weakness preventing one from keeping one's mind on the topic in place, so to speak. We are likely to be too tired to follow out all the pathways of thought into which a given story leads. I'm sure you have all experienced that fatigue, that awful resistance. Notice that Miller says boredom, tiredness, those are the terms he uses, at the required reading list in every subject. It is a common complaint among teachers of literature how little students read, and an ever-pressing and present concern how to get students to read literature, let alone literary criticism. And yet, as Miller contends, and this is awfully important, the rhetorical study, I'm quoting him, the rhetorical study of literature has crucial practical implications for our moral, social, and political lives. Pay attention to the fact that Miller is emphasizing the importance not just of reading literary texts, but of mastering the ability to read well, to interpret them. That is, to interpret literary stories, a kind of mastery that falls within the province of literary criticism. You will see now why I was alerting you to the realization of the task ahead, to the necessity to read more, learn more, to keep on learning always. The importance of literature for Miller lies in its performative nature. To explain works of literature by their political, social, and historical content or contexts is fine. The context is indeed important in order to understand a literary text, since it provides us with all kinds of useful information. But literature is more than all that. Literature is itself a source of political or cognitive acts, not subordinated to them. Literature must be in some way a cause and not merely an effect. And the reason for us academics lies in the ethical nature of reading. The ethical moment in reading leads or should lead to an act. In any ethical moment, Miller argues, there's an imperative, I must do this. And this imperative enters into the social, institutional, political, for example, as Sylvia also mentioned, in what we teach, in the selection of reading lists, and what we as writers, as critics, write. Our writing as critics, Miller goes on to argue, in its turn, is performative, or should be performative, productive. It is a doing which causes other things to be done in their turn. Our reading and writing as academics and professionals make something happen in the interpersonal, social, and political realms, opening ways for fresh perceptions and new interpretations of what we call reality, and thus making changes possible. If we betray the text, bending it to fit with our preconceptions or with unexamined critical opinions, is our responsibility. Thus, the need to keep in mind the performative effect of what we teach or write on others. I'd like to turn again at this point to George Steiner, whom I mentioned before. I was fortunate enough to listen to him in a seminar in Cambridge when I was a very young assistant lecturer in English. Literature is to read and reread, he kept on insisting. And I have never forgotten it. Those words have been ever present in my mind. And indeed, I can testify that every rereading has provided me with the exhilaration of a new discovery, enlarging my understanding of the literary text and the life vision it conveys. So let me finish this talk making mine his words on the transmission of knowledge, or rather on the relationship between teacher and student that he expresses in his book, Lessons of the Masters. Here's what he says about teaching, and this is directed to those of you that wish to follow up an academic career. There's no craft more privileged. To awaken in other human being powers, dreams beyond one's own, to induce in others a love for that which one loves, to make of one's inward present their future. That is a threefold adventure like no other. So I do hope that at least some of you may share and enjoy, as I myself have had the fortune to do, this wonderfully rewarding experience. That's all. Thank you very much for your attention. So now, we are turning to our students because they are our priority. And so I think it will be a wonderful help for other students to explain and to comment on on what has been like your process of choosing a theme for your TFM, what have been the difficulties, why you have chosen a specific theoretical frame, what are your aims, and think of this as performative too. So it's not going to be just to explain what you have achieved or are aiming to achieve, but to help other students with what you, with your difficulties and with your joys at discovering something. So perhaps we can start in alphabetical order. Okay. And so we have now Arturo Mora, and the floor is yours. So you can tell us of your experience.
Thank you very much, Dr. De La Concha. Well, how did I come to choose my subject for my TFM? Mainly because I was already biased because I'm a musician. So as this is a Master's in Cultural Studies, it was obvious that one of my fields of expertise had to be linked with one of my, I wish, future fields of expertise, that's literary critic. So last year I had a very beautiful subject, literature and music, and I already spoke with Dr. Lorenz about how to create interesting papers that could mix both subjects critically. And I had some ideas in mind. One of them was to analyze how poetry in English has been adapted into heavy metal music, to heavy metal songs. I was a former metal musician, so I knew the genre quite well. And the seed that started it all was British band Iron Maiden's version of St. Neil Taylor Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is a highlight among metal music. I started pulling the thread, and I found out almost 40 different poetry adaptations into metal music. This is my corpus of work now. 40 songs, one full album. I also have found 15 songs and 3 full albums in languages other than English. And last year I was lucky to study with Dr. Cristina Garrigós the subject Metodología de la Investigación Literaria y Cultural, in which she encouraged us to write a mini TFM. So I tried luck with this subject, and well, I was really happy with the final paper I wrote, which is going to be the basis of my full-scale TFM, and who knows if even anything bigger. because I think I will have to stretch down the corpus a bit. Then, if you're going to work on one of these subjects, you have to find a hypothesis, and you have to find which are the objectives you have in mind when addressing such a work. My main objectives were first to help legitimize the metal music genre as a valid transmitter of high culture into the world of popular culture. And on the other hand, and in this one I was influenced by Douglas Lanier's book on Shakespeare and popular culture. My other objective was to create a classification, a typology of adaptations into metal music songs. So for last year's paper, I chose 5 metal adaptations. Now I have to study the other 35 to see if my classification is right. Then the structure of the paper is first to speak about previous considerations, like, for example, the relation between music and poetry. Something organic, something natural. We all know that music comes even before the written word, but, well, it has to be addressed at some point. It is important to speak about the English language as a stress-timed language, and the importance of the iambic feet as an utterance way that has to be adapted into a musical context. And then it is very important to speak about metal music as a way of transmitting culture. According to a 1993 survey, 10 million Americans like very much metal music, and 19 million Americans hate it profoundly. So it is a massive communication tool, especially for young people, but it is also a source of critical tendencies, of critical currents. This is very important because Simon During spoke about cultural studies as the engaged analysis of contemporary cultures, engaged standing for political, critical. And Simon During said that cultural studies' claims to a politics of resistance has been deeply inflected by rock's rebellion. So rock and roll being the seed of heavy metal, I think we are on the right path. And it is a path that hasn't been explored much. I have only found 3 papers on specific songs and a PhD thesis that was directed by Dr. Ballesteros in this very university about Victorian songs and their application to rock and roll contexts. So it is a brand new field, but it is a field that exists. Metal studies is a current that was founded in 2008 in a conference that was called the first Heavy Fundamentalisms Conference. Not fundamentalisms, but fundamentalisms. It was carried out in Salzburg, Austria, and the native city of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. In the year 2011, there was a special number of the Journal for Cultural Research, which has a 9.8 impact index out of 11 in the MIAR classification. And there are now flourishing academics in the field, scholars like sociologists Dina Weinstein, Keith Ken Harris, or Andy Brown, or Carl Sprackling, most of them in British universities. So the field exists, and scholarly publications are coming out every year. A very important consideration to take into account is about what heavy metal and not other music styles give to these kinds of adaptations. The aesthetics of heavy metal, the aesthetics in the design of album covers, in the live staging, and in the personal image of the performers. Of course, it's very appealing for a young audience. We have a postmodernist claim because metal is counterculture. It's the exploration of the dark side of humanity. Young people who listen to heavy metal do not only conceive it as just music, they also listen to the lyrics. According to Robert Walser, 90% of the American fans of the band Iron Maiden know the lyrics by heart. And most of them study the sources of these lyrics. In this case, the sources are poems in the English tongue. Then there is also a political claim because significances are being recontextualized into the metal context, as I have already found out in some of the examples I've analyzed so far. The lyrics are important in metal music, but also is the formal experimentation.
We are used to pop songs which have the typical structure, introduction, verse, chorus, guitar solo optional, chorus, fade out. In the case of heavy metal, the songs can expand up to more than 10 minutes, have different structures, have some kind of a symphonic flavor to it. So they can be easily adapted to any kind of source, even a poetic one. There's a huge expressivity, a huge dynamic range. Sometimes there are high-pitched operatic voices, other times there are low guttural voices. There is guitar distortion, but there are also abrupt silences. And therefore, there's almost quite an operatic flavor to it. And then there is a tool of its own, the power chord. I don't want to go too technical here, but one of the notes comprising a musical chord tells us if the chord is major or minor. Major chords are said to be happy, and minor chords are said to be sad, to be sad moods. There are many counterexamples to it, but that's simplistically the way music is perceived by the human brain. In the case of heavy metal, because of the strong distortion that happens when we play several notes together, that note is omitted. Therefore, the listener doesn't know if the mood is major or minor until a few bars go by and the brain completes the gaps. So that's very important because it's a kind of harmonic ambiguity that classical composers had studied a lot. Claude Debussy had made it many times. You know if the piece is major or minor when you are into the 20th bar or even farther. This happens to a lesser degree, but it also happens in the heavy metal context. Good. Then, about the classification, I want to make the typology, which, as I said, was based on Douglas Lanier. What I'm willing to explore is the choice of each of the poems, why each determined metal band has chosen this or that poem. Of course, the degree of fidelity with the original, the recontextualization of the poem, which is a field in which I have found very important examples, and the musical resources used. Of course, I'm using some of musicology, but a lot of the cultural studies and metal studies are theory. And well, so far I have come out with 5 different types of adaptations. The ones I've called reproduction, retelling, re-elaboration, quotation, and reorientation. Reproduction would be just to take the original poem and turn it into the song lyrics. No further elaboration. Retelling would be to rewrite the original words, to tell the same story but with different words. Of course, this applies mostly for narrative poems, not for lyric poems. And Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Iron Maiden would be one chief example. Re-elaboration is a very important one and a more culturally loaded one, because it means starting from a poem and changing its significance, starting a dialogue with the original text, or even contradict it. And there is an example in the song Revelations by Iron Maiden, which first verse is taken from Gilbert Keith Chesterton's O God of Earth and Altar, a hymn that he wrote, and that is in the English hymn book right now, and from which Iron Maiden elaborate a song which speaks about different kinds of spirituality, different kinds of religion, and it even challenges the binary duality established by the Christian religion. Then there is the category of quotation, in which just a couple of verses are taken and are taken out of context into a different media, a song. And finally, reorientation, which I have borrowed from Douglas Lanier, and which he described reoriented narrative as that in which the narrative is told from a different point of view. We also have to resort to Iron Maiden in this case. They wrote their song The Trooper based on Alfred Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade. This poem describes the Battle of Balaclava, in which the British lost at the hands of the Russians in the Crimean War. It's a third-person narrative, poetic narrative. In the case of Iron Maiden, they tell it from the perspective of a British soldier who knows that he is going to die. The most important thing is that Iron Maiden used to play this song live in the early 1980s, when the Cold War was still going on, and when the Falkland Wars with Argentina was still going on. And they usually started the concerts with a war speech by Winston Churchill. So here we have a culturally loaded, recontextualized meaning from an old poem into contemporary media. So far, I have found as main conclusions that the predominance of the metal musician's choice is about epic and sad lyrics. That Edgar Allan Poe and William Blake are the preferred writers, of course, because of the gloomy, sad atmospheres they portrayed. And in musical terms, minor modes expressing sadness, E minor and 4/4 rhythms. But after I study my full corpus, I wish to prove either that my classification is right, or to change it, or to expand it. Let's see where this takes me. Thank you.
Well, perhaps now we can turn to Claudio Valdivia, who, yeah, you can. The floor is yours, and then we can leave the questions. Should there be questions after?
Well, first place, I'd like to thank you,
You may
Doctora
speak
Concha.
Spanish if you prefer. I mean,
Oh, no problem. I think I'll manage.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd like to thank you, Doctora de la Concha, for your presentation, which has been inspiring, and it's been interesting because some of the ideas in which I'm going to work on my TFM are related with some of the topics, mainly that of the responsibility of the intellectuals. I think we are responsible. We are in need of works that help us to understand what's going on in our society. We live in dark times, darker as the time goes by, and these times might even become dangerous. I like also to thank personally Doctora Laura Alba, which I remember very well her subject, Análisis del Discurso. In certain sense, my TFM began when I began reading Bourdieu's approach to her subject, Análisis del Discurso. And from that point, I began reading some authors, and that's the genesis of my TFM. I began reading Marcuse, which has a book called Eros and Civilization. In this book, he describes, he makes an approach about Marx's work and Freud's work, and he explains in very simple ideas how our society is built in two main poles, which are the Eros and the Thanatos, which is love and death. Eros is our capacity to be passionate for living things, and Thanatos is our we can say our civilization or force, the compound that makes us to build effective civilization, but also castrates our capacities. So from that reading, which is a very famous book of the 70s, I think very well known for the intellectuals in that age. I came to the 80s reading Marshall Berman's All That Is Solid Melts Into Air, which is another book of philosophy regarding this topic of how our world is constructed. But he made in a very interesting way for us, because he used literature characters to describe how our society was melting into something that is fluid. We'll talk later about Bauman's work. Then he began with Faustus, which is a character in which he epitomizes the our capacity to be defeated by technology and to evolve our lives into something that just to things which are not natural. And from that point, I came to read Bauman's work, which is more actual work, and Bauman's talks about liquid modernity, and this is an idea which is very powerful because it explains how our world has lost the things that help us to be to feel safely. I mean, religion or country or even the king, which are ideas in which the past we as humans, as human beings, could go to ask help, but not anymore. Even God has died, as Nietzsche said. So, regarding all these ideas, I found an author, which is Alan Moore, an author of graphic novels, who has an aim of a very particular aim of using ideas and becoming symbols, using ideas that become symbols. So Alan Moore has a video. He doesn't like very much cameras, but he made a film which is entitled "The Mindscape of Alan Moore," in which he talked about the creation of symbols that can achieve a change in our society, symbols that can manipulate other people's mind or even shake our consciousness. Then what I want to make in my TFM is to use all those powerful ideas I mentioned and to explore the three of the greatest the graphic novels made by Alan Moore, which are V for Vendetta, Watchmen, and From Hell. My tutor is, I hope, will be my dear Professor Antonio Ballesteros. So I think we'll make a great job doing this exploration of how he managed to deliver these ideas, which are quite complex, into the reader's mind. If I can speak of those three works, which are very different, V for Vendetta became a film very well known, but it's very interesting how the face that is used by the protagonist became the symbol of the group which is fighting against the disinformation affected by the governments, by the U.S. government, for instance. Regarding the Watchmen, I think it's very interesting to talk about Bauman's work, who mentions the concept of trash people. Trash people, for Bauman, is the people that inhabits our society, but does not belong really to the productive or does not participate in the society because the system managed to remove them and to deprive them from their voices. Then these people is the people that inhabits this work, and to organize this war, this madness, which is too close to our reality. There are some heroes, which in fact they are anti-heroes, which are the watchmen, and the pervasive question around the graphic novel is who watches the watchmen. They are here to watch us, but they are not better from us. Who is going to be able to stop them from doing evil things, which in fact is what, spoiler alert, which is what happens to the end. The best of the watchmen manages to destroy, to kill thousands of people, only to achieve a salvation for humanity. And the third graphic novel in which I want to delve is From Hell. In this graphic novel, which is an authentic study of the 19th century London, is a retelling of the Jack the Ripper tale. We can call it a tale, but it's we all know that something happened at that age, and Alan Moore used one of the versions of this tale in which Prince Albert could be the origin of those killings, because the Queen Victoria sent these men to let's say, pacify or neutralize the possibility of someone being aware of Prince Albert affairs. So the protagonist of this book, which is Jack, is a man who is a mystic, who is, I think, is very, very similar to Alan Moore, to the author, and he travels around London, making an explanation, very meta-linguistical, very meta-historical, meta-literary, and he explores the city, describing how things have been built, and his description of the city makes us understand that we are acting in our world in a sense that we are echoes from our past. Even if this past is horrific, even if this past is full of rape or violence and war and blood, we reproduce these things. So reading these stories made me remember those philosophical works I mentioned before. And finally, I found the link that made me choose this topic. That's my idea in brief lines.
Well, thank you very much. I think that both works are very ambitious, and they're so very interesting because they connect so well literature, culture, and real life. And so it shows how cultural analysis and literary analysis may help us to understand what's going on in our world. So, well, I think it's fascinating, very, very interesting. So I hope, do you have any comments or questions to ask? Well, I have lots of questions, but I'm afraid it's a little bit late, but perhaps, perhaps one or two we can go on talking about them, because I think both subjects are fascinating.
Both DFM sound to me more like doctoral thesis.
Yeah. So perhaps it can be the first stage or the first step, and you can go on, working in depth in order to produce a wonderfully interesting
Who knows?
PhD.
Because you're going to be analyzing 3
Dissertation.
different works, and that's quite a lot. So I don't know how you're going to manage to.
But I had to delete the first one, which is Swamp Thing, but I'm going to read it anyway. But this is one thing I would like to talk about, that we all researchers face these two topics. We have the expansion of our readings, which is apparently infinite, and on the other side we have to reduce, we have to summarize, and we have to compress to be able to write something that's interesting.
Fine. Well, I'm so sorry to have to bring this to an end, but anyway, that's wonderful thought, and I hope you encourage your colleagues, your fellow students, to come up with their ideas, and perhaps next year we can have a full round table, all with your fellow students and all commenting on their works. Thank you very, very much.
I think we are the luckiest of teachers
Yeah.
in Spain. We have such wonderful students. Thank you so much. And this is just one example. I'm sure that next year we can have some other students. But Claudio and Arturo, thank you so much. It's just wonderful to have you
They're
here. Really.
path-breaking.
Yes. Thank you. The next Bob Dylan. Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Well,